Top 10 Horrific True Crime Cases You Should Never Web Search. There are some crimes so unimaginable that searching for the graphic details online would leave even the most hardened true crime fan shaken. When we imagine the suffering of the victims, it's difficult to understand how these sadistic killers went through with it. 10. The Cheshire Family Murders. In 2007, the Petty family, Jennifer Hawke Petty and her 2 teenage daughters, were assaulted and murdered in a Connecticut home. The father, Dr. William Petty, was injured but managed to escape with his life before the perpetrators burned the house to the ground. 2 paroled burglars, Joshua Komisarjevsky and Stephen Hayes, targeted the family when Jennifer and her 17-year-old daughter Haley were at a grocery store. They followed them home and subjected them to brutal torture before killing them. Haley and her 11-year-old sister Mengele died through smoke inhalation as they were tied to their beds, and Jennifer died through strangulation. Details of the crime are shockingly unbearable, as it was revealed police were aware that the family were held as hostages but had spent too long securing the street rather than entering the home to help the family. The killers were sentenced to death, which was later changed to life imprisonment as Connecticut abolished capital punishment in 2012. 9. The Murder of Sylvia Likens. The brutal and cruel murder of Sylvia Likens still disturbs Indiana more than 50 years later. In 1965, police officers found the body of 16-year-old Likens laid on a filthy mattress. She was covered in more than 150 burns and cuts. It was clear at first that the young girl had starved to death, as she was little more than skin and bone. Later, it was found that she died of a brain hemorrhage and malnutrition. Mother of 7 Gertrude Banishevsky was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Likens' parents had paid Banishevsky $20 a week to care of her and their other daughter Jenny. Instead, Banishevsky allowed her own children to beat Likens and force her to eat feces. Attorney Natty Bumpo said a lot of people have compared this to Lord of the Flies. But that was just a bunch of uncontrolled children. In this case, they had an adult supervising what they were doing. It wasn't children going wild. It was children doing what they were told. 8. Richard Speck slaughter. When Richard Speck entered South Chicago Community Hospital, where he methodically tortured and murdered 8 nurses, the state of Chicago changed forever. During the early hours of July 14, 1966, Speck led the nurses like lambs to the slaughter during an attack that lasted 5 hours. Distracted by his own killing spree, Speck didn't realize that one of his hostages had hidden under a bunk bed until the massacre was over. She then jumped from a window and ran for her life. All the victim recalled of Speck was his tattoo that read, "Born to Raise Hell." 2 days later, the cold-blooded killer arrived at County Cook Hospital following a suicide attempt, and a doctor recognized the tattoo from news reports. The assistant Cook County District Attorney said of the sadistic attacks, like lambs to the slaughter. 7. Cannibal Armin Meiwes. In 2001, Armin Meiwes from Germany posted an advert on the cannibalism fetish website The Cannibal Cafe looking for a well-built 18 to 30-year-old to be slaughtered and then consumed. Many people replied to the advert, but all of them got cold feet apart from burnt Jürgen Armando Brand. Throughout his childhood, Meiwes fantasized that if he were to eat someone, they would be with him forever, so he would never be lonely again. The videotape Meiwes made of himself dismembering Brand is stomach-churning, to say the least. Meiwes amputated the victim's penis and they both attempted to eat, but it was a well-built 18 to 30-year-old to be slaughtered and then consumed. 6. Kermit Gosnell's abortions. Twisted serial abortionist Kermit Gosnell performed late-term abortions in his unsanitary and unsafe clinics at the Women's Medical Society in West Philadelphia. He had owned the medical center since 1979, and complaints about his practice stretched back decades. In 2011, Gosnell was arrested on suspicion of murdering 7 infants who had at first survived his initial abortion attempts but later fell victim to his unspeakable evil. A grand jury heard that Gosnell was not an obstetrician or gynecologist, as he had failed to qualify. However, he was charging up to $3,000 for each late-term abortion. His staff members testified against him, detailing how they witnessed infants move or cry after he performed the termination, and the details of how he then ended their lives are deeply distressing. Gosnell was convicted on 3 counts of first-degree murder, including causing the death of 1 adult patient, 1 count of involuntary manslaughter, 21 felony counts of illegal late-term abortion, and 211 counts of violating the 24-hour informed consent law. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 5. Josef Mengele's experiment. Twisted Nazi doctor Josef Mengele was known for his sinister medical experiments during World War II that mostly involved the horrific treatment of twins. In 1943 at Auschwitz, Mengele selected children for his deadly experiments. Renata Gutmann was a twin and Mengele survivor. In a haunting account, she recalls, "I was separated from my brother and mother and taken to a hospital where I was measured and x-rayed. Blood was taken from my neck. Once, I was strapped to a table and cut with a knife. I got injections that made me throw up and have diarrhea. While ill in the hospital after an injection, guards came in to take the sick to be killed." The total victim count is unknown, but witnesses revealed that Mengele killed as many as 14 twins in just one night through injecting chloroform into their hearts. After the war, he evaded prosecution by escaping to South America, where he died from a stroke aged 67 years old in 1979. 4. Toy Box Killer's Torture Room. David Ray Parker became known as the Toy Box Killer following the chilling discovery of his sadistic torture chamber in 1999. It's estimated he kidnapped, tortured and murdered up to 60 victims in New Mexico. Many of the bodies were never recovered as they were dismembered and dumped in undisclosed locations. His final intended victim luckily managed to escape with her life after 3 days of unimaginable torture. Police officers that arrived at the scene of the crime discovered a soundproof truck trailer equipped for torturing victims that contained various surgical instruments and a gynecology table with restraints. Parker also made recordings of his victims' torture. He showed no remorse for his crimes, explaining, "It was a source of entertainment for me to create these tapes." There was no justice for his victims, as Parker died of a heart attack in 2002 before he had begun serving his 223 years in prison. 3. Albert Fish's Letter. Serial killer Albert Fish preyed on young children in the state of New York. The sadistic child torturer and murderer bragged that he had children in every state. In 1936, he was executed for the murders of 10-year-old Grace Budd, 9-year-old Frances McDonnell, and 4-year-old Billy Gaffney. The details of the murders are only for those with a strong stomach, as Fish also spoke in detail how he also cannibalized the remains. Fish also sent a twisted letter to the mother of Grace Budd just to add to her suffering. He is remembered as one of the evilest serial killers in history. 2. The Hi-Fi Murders. The Hi-Fi Murders in 1974 still shock today. 3 men, Dale Selby, William Andrews, and Keith Roberts, entered the Hi-Fi shop in Ogden just before closing time. They then held store workers 20-year-old Stanley Walker and 18-year-old Michelle Ainsley hostage in the basement before robbing the store. Later, 16-year-old Byron Naisbitt entered the store as he was running errands and was also taken hostage. Both Brian's mother, Carol Peterson Naisbitt, and Stanley's father, Orrin Walker, arrived at the store to look for their children, where they suffered the same fate. What happened next is unimaginable and involved the hostages being forced to drink a corrosive liquid that caused their lips, tongues and throats to burn and the flesh to peel away from their skin. The hours of torture also included the use of a ballpoint pen as a weapon, and 3 of the hostages were shot dead. The 2 surviving victims, Orrin Walker and Byron Naisbitt, sustained permanent life-changing injuries. The twisted killers were executed by lethal injection, all except for Keith Roberts, who was charged with aggravated robbery and sentenced to life imprisonment. 1. The Toolbox Killer's Recording. Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris were a depraved serial killing duo who murdered 5 girls by the most sinister means possible. The victims, who were aged between 13 and 18, had been kidnapped on the highways of Southern California over a period of 5 months in 1979. The killers used an ice pick, screwdriver, vice grips and pliers to subject them to the worst kind of physical pain. They also recorded the screams of their victims. Retired Los Angeles County Deputy District Attorney who prosecuted the killers was still haunted by the evidence for years after the trial. He said, "I would hear the girls screaming, and I was running to get to them. Too late." The Toolbox Killers have sat on death row for decades. Behind bars, Bittaker said, "I would hear the girls screaming, and I was running to get to them. Too late." We hope you enjoy our list of the top 10 horrific true crime cases you should never web search.